Hello, everybody. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing project assignment number 6. So let me go ahead and screen share and we'll get started here. All right. So on Blackboard here, so you see this is the template you're going to put your answers in. This is my sample document, and then this is the rubric if you want to see what constitutes each type of grade. So the most important things here are this is what you'll fill in, and then this is the sample you can use as a reference. So let me go ahead and go to my sample here. So throughout the semester, you've been exploring different variables in your data set. So now in this assignment, you're going to make research questions about the variables that you're interested in exploring, complete research, and then compare the results of the research to what you've discovered from the data, and then create a claim about your variables that you can test in Project 7. The grading policy is the same as all the assignments have been. If you don't get 100% on the first attempt, you'll get a 50% and you'll get needs revisions. Once you make the changes, then you should get 100%. So let's start going through this here. So question number 1. In the space below, give a short description of your data set in 2 to 3 sentences. In your description, you should include who or what your population is, where they're from, when they're from, and variables collected. You may also include the reason your data was first collected if a reason was made available. Now, you may not be able to answer all of this depending on the information given for your data set, but try to answer as much as you can. So first of all, just tell me what your data set is and where and the repository is from. So my data set was called Salaries for Professors from the repository CAR. And then the population for my data set is all college professors in the United States from 2008 to 2009. Where did I get that from? So on our Guru, if you go to your data set repository, and then you would type in your repository and your data set name here. And then this I button, so that's going to give you the information about the data set you used in Project 1. So that's going to be very useful here. So that's where I got the 2008 to 2009, and also where I got that we're dealing with colleges in the US. Okay, so back to my document. So that's where all this came from. So that kind of answers who the population is, what's the large group the sample was taken from, where they're from, when they're from, and then the variables. So you can get that probably from this page. So I listed these 6 variables here. You can also get that just by opening the data set. So I want you to list like all the different variables, not just the ones that you explored for the first. So if you double click and open the data set, I can see rank, discipline, years since PhD, years of service, and sex and salary are my variables. Remember, the X variable is just a meaningless like person number 1, person number 2 label variable. So I listed what all the variables are here, and then I said what I focused my previous projects on, which was years of service, sex, and salary. And then question 2, so in the space below, summarize your data investigation for your data set. What were your key explorations or discoveries? What story does your data tell? This should be a narrative, include any visuals or number summaries created in previous projects. That will help tell the story of the data set. So this shouldn't be too much new writing here. So in my previous project assignments, I explored sex, salary, and the relationship between years of service and salary. So these were the variables that I explored in like project 2, I explored sex. Projects 2 and 4, I explored salary, and project 3, I explored years of service and salary, the connection between them. And then I also did a confidence interval on salary in my project number 5. And I also happened to do one on sex too. All right, so let's start with my exploration into sex from project assignment 2. So in project assignment 2, I explored sex. The following bar graph shows my discoveries about sex within my data set. So I copied and pasted the bar plot as evidence of where my information came from. And then this here is basically just the paragraph from the end of project 2. So let me go to my project 2 here to show you what I mean. So I took my bar graph and then I took this paragraph here and I put it into the document, and I just changed the wording a little bit like here because I know I didn't include the frequency table in the document just to make it concise as a summary. So I just made it more specific about that it's all based on the bar graph specifically in this example. So, just make sure that what you write when you copy, you should be able to just copy paste. Just make sure that, based on what you have included in the document, that what your paragraph makes sense. So this, like I said, this paragraph was basically just copied and pasted. And then the next thing, so I'm going to talk about my explanation into salary in projects 2 and 4. So I included my numerical summary from project 4 and my histogram from project 2. So the following numerical summary and histogram shows my discoveries about salary within my data set. So the numerical summary here, so that was copied and pasted from project 4, or not copied and pasted. I took a screenshot of everything up through the outliers, basically. That's the most important information. And then I took my screenshot, not my screenshot, my histogram from project 2 and included that also. Those two things together should be the best things to describe that variable. And then this paragraph here, this came from the end of project 4. That's project 5. Here's project 4. So I basically took this paragraph. Once again, I didn't include the box plot, so I took that out. But other than that, I basically just copied and pasted that, and because that was basically what I discovered about the salary variable. So that was once again copied and pasted. And then the next thing, so project assignment 3, I explored the relationship between years of service and salary. And then, so I took my scatter plot and the correlation coefficient and least squares line from project 3 and copied and pasted that here. So the following scatter plot shows my discoveries about the relationship between years of service and salary in my data set. So going to my project 3 here, just right here. So I just took my correlation coefficient, least squares line, and the scatter plot, copied and pasted it. And then I took this paragraph here, but I didn't include the part at the end about who would be interesting to. I just talked about the summary part of what it means. That's the most important part to include. And that's basically what I did here. And then the last thing I talked about in this part, so in project assignment 5, I also created confidence intervals for the salary and sex variables. So the following images show the results. So these were my confidence intervals from project 5. For the our guru screenshots that we had. So this was the proportion one I had. I did both in my sample. You would have only done one. And this is my mean one. So, and then along with that, I also included the paragraphs I had here. So I included this paragraph here. I didn't include the part about the who it might be interesting to. That's not really important to include. And then I also included the one for proportion where I was talking about it. And that's basically what I did. You'll only have one confidence interval, but other than that, it should be the same idea as what I have here. You can use what I have as a sample. Let me change this font to match the rest of my font here. There we go. Okay. So that's what I want for the summary. So you can follow kind of what I did here, do a similar kind of model. It shouldn't be too much extra work. Okay. Question 3 on here. Consider your investigation this semester and what you've discovered about certain variables in your data set. Review the graphs, tables, numerical summaries, and confidence intervals you've created or found in previous project assignments. Ponder any questions you have. Does anything stand out? And then we're going to pose 2 research questions. It could be about a mean, a proportion, a comparison of a mean or proportion of one of your variables between 2 different categories. So using one of your qualitative variables for the categories, correlation between 2 quantitative variables, or independence between 2 qualitative variables. So I'll explain. So I want you ideally to try to focus your questions on the 3 variables you've been working with all semester, but you're welcome to bring in other variables in the data set also if you would like to. And you only need 2 questions here. I included more just to give you more examples. So my first question was about a mean. So the first type of question you can do. So remember, I was focusing on salary all semester. So what's the mean salary of a college professor in the United States? That's the question that I would want to ask. And then, so I also was focusing on the proportion of females in particular, especially with my confidence interval. So for the proportion type of question here, So what's the proportion of female college professors in the United States? And then these two here, so these are the comparison of a mean or proportion between two categories. So in the first question here, I was comparing salary between males and females. So that was one of my qualitative variables. So I can use that as a comparison point. So do male or female college professors have a higher mean salary? Just make sure you're focusing on two different categories, not more than two. So if your qualitative variable had more than two categories, pick two to focus on. And then this one was comparing the proportion of professors at the highest rank, which is professor, between males and females. So is the proportion of male professors or female professors at the highest rank higher? So these two were the comparing the mean or proportion of one of your variables between two different categories, with the category being one of your qualitative variables. And then the next question, this is the correlation question. So this is what I focused on in project 3. So is there a correlation between years of service and salary of college professors? This basically just directly comes from my project 3. And then the last question, so type of question you could do independence between two qualitative variables. You'll have to bring in another qualitative variable if you do this type of question. So one of my other qualitative variables was rank. I talked about that up here too. But are sex and rank independent of each other? So that could be another question that I could consider. Like I said, you only have to do two of these, whatever's most interesting to you. And then the next part, use the internet, library, or other scholarly resource to research the question above that interests you the most. And then, so you only have to research the one that's the most interesting to you, one question. You only have to research a second question if you can't find anything about the first question. So, I did research on all of my questions just to give you examples, but like I said, you only need to research one question. So my first question was about what's the mean salary of a college professor in the United States. So when I Googled that, I found the average salary of a full-time college professor in the United States across all ranks is $112,139. And make sure you also always include the link for this. My second question was about the proportion of female college professors. I found that 49.8% of college professors were female. Try to focus on recent data for this because that'll serve as like a good comparison point, even if your data set was in the past. So I would recommend trying to focus on current data just for a good comparison point. And then question 3, which was when I was comparing the salaries between male and female professors. So I found males make more than females. Once again, I'm including the links for anything I find. Question 4, is the proportion of male form professors or female professors at the highest rank higher? So I found that males are more likely to be at the professor rank than females. And then question 5, so that was about the correlation between years of service and salary. So I found for that experience in the field and experience teaching affects the salary that's offered to professors. So I'm expecting it to be correlated. And then my last question, are sex and rank independent of each other? So based off this information, I found that men are 2.77 times more likely to be at the professor rank than females. It seems that the rank that a professor is at does depend on their sex. It does appear that those would be dependent on each other. And then the last part here, so based on your research and data exploration, we're going to make a claim greater than, less than, or not equal to type of mathematical claim except for correlation and independence about one of the following. So basically about your research, whatever question you ended up picking. So, and then it does need to be supported by your data set. So you need to provide evidence that is supported by your data set. So for example, for my first question, what's the mean salary of a college professor in the United States? So I found that my mean salary on the internet was $112,139. So for this type of question, if you end up doing just single mean type of question where you're just dealing with, is the mean higher or lower than the number on the internet? That's what you're going to be focusing on, basically. If you're dealing with just a single mean, you're just focusing on just the mean of a quantitative variable. So in this case, So I would say since my mean in my data set was 113,706.50, that's higher than the research. So I'm going to make the claim that the mean salary in the United States is greater than 112,139. And then similarly for a single proportion where you're just talking about literally the numerical proportion, you're not bringing any sort of, you're not comparing it, with a qualitative category or anything. We're just dealing with the numerical value of a single proportion. And so once again, we're going to focus on comparing it to the research here. So 49.8% of my college professors were female. And I'm dealing with this question here. What's the proportion of female college professors in the United States? So my data set only had 9.8%, 9.8% or 39 out of 397. I got that from my bar graph. So my bar graph here. So the total here was 397, 39 of them were female. So 39 out of 397 which is not only 9.8%, were female. So that indicates the proportion of college professors that are female is actually less than the research value of 49.8%. So that's if you're doing a claim for either a single mean or a single proportion, where you're just dealing with the numerical value of that variable. But of course, there are other types of questions. So, for example, if you did ones with a comparison of a mean or proportion between two different categories. So, on this type of question, so this is really going to be based on your data more than your research. Your research might say something entirely different than your data for this. So for these questions, we were kind of using the numerical numbers like a basis for comparison to our data set. But in these questions, we're not really doing that. The research might not even make sense for the data. In this case, it did. My research said that the mean salary of male professors was higher than females, and my data set also shows that. But I'm going to show you how I got these numbers here, so you could also get them if you did something similar to me. So if you go to our guru, and you go to Analytics, Analysis, and Numerical Summaries, you select your data set, and then salary was my variable. And then you can select a factor that you're splitting it on. So I was splitting it on sex. And then univariate. And then I'm looking to compare the mean. So that gives me the male mean and the female mean. So I can see the male mean is higher than the female mean. So that's going to kind of form the basis for my hypothesis here. So in my data set, the mean salary of college professors is $115,090.40, and my mean salary of females was only $101,002.40. So that tells me that males are making more than females. So that's going to be my claim. My research also backs that up, but this is more unless you're doing a single mean or proportion. So unless you're just focusing on the numerical value of a quantitative variable or the numerical proportion of a qualitative variable, just a single mean or a single proportion. Unless you're focusing on that, your research and data set might not agree, and that is okay. The claim is going to be based on what your data set agrees with, even if the research doesn't agree with it. That's just an interesting side note that you can actually, think about and talk about later. Okay, and then similarly, so the other question I had here, so that was question 3, which was about comparing male and female college professors. And also the next question was, is the proportion of male professors or female professors at the highest rank higher? So my research said males. My data set did back that up. I will show you where I got that from. So let me go to my data set here. So I went to plots, create plot, and bar plot. So I'm going to make a new bar plot that separates it by sex. So my factor that I'm dealing with is rank, and then I want to separate it by sex. I'm going to add the value labels. So, okay, so I had, based on my original bar plot, I had 30, remember the numbers? Okay, 358 males and 39 females. And then out of those, so I had 248 males that were at the highest professor rank and 18 females that were at the highest professor rank. So if you get those proportions, I get 69.3% for the males and 46.2% for the females. So that tells me males are at the professor rank at a higher proportion than females. So that does back up my research, so that is going to be my claim. The proportion of male college professors who are at the professor rank is greater than the proportion of female college professors who are at the professor rank. And then the next question was about the correlation between years of service and salary. So once again, this one was a little different than my research. So my research for this said that there was going to be a correlation. But when I did my scatter plot in Project 3, I found there wasn't a correlation. So this is one of those examples where you're going to make your claim based off what your data set is showing, not what the research is showing. So my data set is showing that there's not a significant correlation between years of service and salary. And the backup for that is that my correlation coefficient was very low, which was indicating a weak positive relationship. So that just came directly from my Project 3. And then the last question. So my research should indicate that sex and rank were dependent. And so that was my question. Are sex and rank independent of each other? But I'm finding that they are dependent on each other. Your rank is dependent on what your sex is because men are way more common to be at the professor rank. So backing that up basically was backed up by the same thing here that I did up here basically. Since it's way more common for males to be at the professor rank than females, that's telling me sex does have an impact on the rank that the professor is at. So once again, for these claims, let me kind of just do a quick recap here. So your claim is gonna, like, you only have to do one, first of all, and it's gonna be based on whatever you did the research on. But unless you're doing a single mean or a single proportion, so you're just dealing with one quantitative variable or one qualitative variable and dealing with the numerical value for the mean or proportion of that variable. That one you're going to be basically comparing the number that is in your data set to the number that's in your research. But for the others where you're maybe comparing a mean or proportion between two categories or doing correlation or independence, focus on what your data set is showing, even if it's different than the research. That's what your claim is going to be based off of. And like I said, use what I have here as examples if you're confused on how to write your claim. And that is it. So that is project assignment number 6. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.